Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. We're really excited to have a guest here today, Dr. Rachel Allyn. She is a licensed psychologist and pleasure expert, as well as TEDx speaker and certified yoga teacher, specializing in mind-body medicine, particularly as it intersects with relationship and intimacy therapy. Fun. She has a book coming out with the Shambhala Publications on body-based methods to have more healthy pleasures in your life, given America's fraught relationship with the body and with pleasure and history of repression. The book is based on her 2019 TEDx talk called Pleasure to the People, Reclaiming Healthy Pleasure in Your Life. Please welcome Dr. Rachel Allyn. Thanks for joining us on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. I could talk on and on about it. And so I'm always happy to invite people in to share in that conversation.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So I was just curious, what was your path that kind of led you into becoming a pleasure expert?
Right, that is a good question. That makes sense to ask that. And, I had been working in psychotherapy, and I had slowly been really integrating body-based methods. And so it was sort of a parallel. I mean, growing up, I had really been connected more to my body as an athlete. And then I had also been growing up in a household that psychologists would call sex positive, or at least body positive, and really knowing about the reproductive body and aspects of love, sex, and intimacy in just a healthy, appropriate way that I think that a lot of people don't get. So I did grow up with more of a balanced approach to both. And as I would talk with other people, I found that really wasn't the case for them. They had a really challenging relationship with their body and their sexuality. So as I was in graduate school in the Bay Area, I specialized in sex therapy track within my clinical PhD. And it was great that they had, being the Bay Area in San Francisco, they had a lot of different options for that. So I was lucky because a lot of programs don't. And then at that same time in graduate school, I also started getting much more into yoga and really learning how to be in my body in a new way, really inhabiting my body. So the two kind of fused together as I started my private practice, as far as really believing it was essential to bring the body into the work as well as talking. And then because I was really working with a lot of couples and relationship issues, I was also integrating that with more sexual health issues and intimacy. And I think that because I was working with so much trauma or suffering or challenges, I found that I really wanted to do more than just help people kind of have an absence of pain and an absence of trauma, although that is a huge thing to do, is to move trauma through and feel better from it. But I found that I really wanted to help people kind of achieve even more than just sort of status quo or just sort of being okay. And so I really was looking more to pleasure and the ways that every time I would say the word sensuality or pleasure, people would immediately assume I was talking about sex. And I realized that it means so much more. But our culture has really pigeonholed those words as meaning, something that a lot of people associate with, being ashamed, or a story from their youth or something around their body and shame in their body. So essentially I started to really look at how can we do more than just survive? How can we thrive? And how can our body be really a component of that to have more of life's healthy pleasures? And so I see it as really kind of the building blocks to happiness, body connection, and connection to healthy pleasures as the key ingredient into having more of a longer term state of joy and happiness in life. So that's kind of how I came to it. I'm always rooting for the underdog. And I feel like among the words, as far as happiness, joy, pleasure is sort of the one that's maybe most vilified or stigmatized. And so I think that's where I find myself to be kind of a champion of that, and really making it more of an everyday term and helping people see life's pleasures as well.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. And I really agree that word pleasure has kind of that taboo sexuality, like all of that just is like, ooh, you can't. And it really, there's all this shame around sexuality, which is unfortunate because it's a critical, important part of any like healthy relationship. And if that's not going as well as you would like it to, that impacts the relationship significantly. And if no one's comfortable talking about it, that would really, it feeds into resentment or anger or sadness or whatever it might look like. And so I really value the work that you're doing because it's so important for healthy relationships and just healthy sense of self. Because I know a lot of people tie their femininity or their masculinity with, they're not a man if they can't perform, or they're not a woman if they can't satisfy the man. Just like all of these expectations without actually like being grounded in their own pleasure and happiness without the sexuality piece necessarily. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. If you aren't able to be in your body in an enjoyable way, if you can't listen to your body, connect to your body, or like being in your body, then how can you share in that with somebody else? And if you can't own your right and your birthright to just healthy pleasures in life, how are you going to be able to really ask for that with somebody else, or to really explain or name kind of what you do or don't like, what is or isn't pleasurable? So it's really, these key ingredients, and this connection to our body, connection to having a healthy relationship with life's pleasures, it certainly then does really pave the way for a deeper kind of intimacy in our relationships, romantic, sexual, and otherwise, and even friendship, and sharing in the pleasures of a healthy, friendship and community.
Absolutely.
So I was wondering, based on what you were saying a little bit earlier, there's some confusion built into these words, right? Or like they overlap and people kind of get it messed up a little bit. How would you distinguish or define the difference between happiness and pleasure? What are the kind of key elements that make them different?
Yes, exactly. Language is powerful, right? We definitely have a lot of associations around language. And so I see pleasure as really starting and emanating in the body, in our physical, visceral, sensory experience that informs our emotions. And so it's much more fleeting as well. It can be there can be intense gratification, but I think one of the key aspects of pleasure is really how it can come and go. And so that's why I talk a lot about our relationship with pleasure, because we need to have balance, recognizing that we can't always be in a place of feeling pleasure. And I would say, that can be similar with happiness too. But there's something about pleasure that it's like it can really pack more of a punch, and it's the opposite is pain, and we have both in life. Of course, but it's much more of a visceral bodily experience, and I think it's a lot more associated also with reward, kind of that we have to earn it. Whereas I don't know that people would say that as much with happiness, although there are people who I think struggle with owning their happiness as well. But I think of happiness as a more longer term, similar to joy, as a more like longer term state, and as something that we kind of reflect on more existentially, kind of built in our memory. Whereas pleasure is a real time in the moment experience that can really form our mental sense of feeling joy or happiness. So it's just some nuances there, but that kind of the fleeting nature of it, the sort of gratification element, the fact that we can become overly dependent on seeking it out as a way to escape or numb or anesthetize our discomforts, I think is a big element that makes it tricky to navigate with. So, and so I think that happiness, I'm not saying that, the opposite of happiness you could say is sadness, and we have both in life, just as we have pleasure and pain. So they're both things to be sort of negotiated and figure out your relationship to them. But I do think that there's a little bit more of that sensory, visceral element and the coming and going quicker element to pleasure. But I'd love to know also more what you guys would say and what you would add to that.
Well, when you mentioned the whole pleasure is more of like in the moment kind of a thing, it actually kind of parallels to a lot of meditation practices that I hear of just, being present in the moment. And it's like, it's not about thinking ahead, the future, or reflecting and dwelling on the past. It's like in the moment, you can create pleasure now. Like, I don't know if you've read The Power of Now. It's all about like now. And it's something, if you're like fretting about not having pleasure or when are you going to get the next pleasure, then you're not really in pleasure in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there can be different pleasures that are about, avoiding a negative consequence. There can be a pleasure in, people can sometimes find a pleasure in self-sacrifice and the lack or absence of pleasure, or even a pleasure in the striving to get pleasure, and sort of almost a masochistic sort of a thing. So it's it can be context dependent too, certainly. But it's certainly not something that we can be in all the time. Like, we have to be able to learn how to tolerate discomfort and pain in the absence of pleasure in order to have a healthy relationship with it. Otherwise, we're always striving to have it, or they're the people who feel that they don't deserve it and they don't ever give it to themselves. And so that's another reason why I found it interesting. And I think that can be the case too with people as far as their appraisal of deserving happiness. Maybe you're blaming themselves as to why they don't have it. So I definitely think there's a lot of, overlap in these different kind of emotional systems and relationships.
Absolutely. I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts about mindfulness and how that relates to our well-being?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that mindfulness it's definitely more and more ubiquitous. We hear it a lot. I mean, we hear it's sort of like a mindfulness approach to this or that, or, do this mindfully or that mindfully. And I think that it's certainly a powerful practice. I mean, my favorite aspect of it is that non-judgmental element of the presence that you find, and then really letting go of that inner critic, storyline that you can attach to it. And that's one thing that I just love about a lot of Eastern philosophy, is that it's really about letting go of the binaries of good, bad, right, wrong, that I know myself I've struggled with at times in my life. I call myself a recovering perfectionist. And a lot of my clients too, that there is kind of this incessant inner critic.
Right.
And not only is that just a painful place, to be within yourself, but it really distracts from getting more to the heart of what you're feeling and the kindness that you can give yourself. That also does help for you to have that with other people. So I really love that element of mindfulness, but I feel like even just the name in and of itself, I think, is sort of a classic example of how American culture in particular has really put the mind on this pedestal. And the body has been seen as, kind of savage, primal, wanton urges that we can't control, that would lead us astray from rationality, from moving forward, from productivity.
Right.
So just like we said, there's a lot to be said for language. And so when we talk about mindfulness, you can certainly have mindfulness about the body. So an embodied experience where you are noticing your breath or your digestion or muscular tension, and trying to really understand that more intentionally, free from judgment. And that's a great way to connect to self and your inner knowing that can inform, what you need to self-regulate. But what I think that mindfulness is a crucial piece that I've found and been learning and researching that it leaves out is really engaging the body as a resource for our healing. Because we're understanding more and more now, thanks to the advances in neuroscience, just the ways that we store our past traumas and stresses in our body if we didn't have at the time a way to sort of complete that fight-flight cycle or to get to safety. So certain traumas and stresses can get literally stuck more on a cellular level. And the research is showing how different types of intentional movement, so through yoga, through dance, tapping, massage, even the discharge release of crying, the powerful ways in which that can help move the trauma through and really recalibrate us. So not only is it sort of physically a really powerful tool, but then our own mental sense that we have this within us, that our body can be this tool with us wherever we go. That doesn't cost money. It's not like a newfangled gadget. It's not an expensive thing. It's not a prescription. That we have this really powerful tool within us to really kind of move through some of the trauma, but then also to be more aware of preventing future trauma or stresses. And so I'm a huge fan of the body, the sort of miracle and the ecosystem of our body. But in my method of bodyfulness, the first layer definitely is very much that mindful approach, embodied mindfulness of like stopping, listening, noticing, free from judgment.
So that's something that historically I've been super bad at, is tapping into my body, like terrible, atrocious. Like you were saying with mindfulness, when I've done mindfulness in the past, it's been the way I framed it, at least, is like, oh, this is a mental exercise where I tune into my body, but it still had the emphasis on the mental part. So I would be curious, since we have you here as an expert, and I'm especially bad at this, where would you have people like me start? Like, what's a good place to start thinking about these things, or to start entering into this topic and get a little bit more in touch with our bodies?
Right. Well, and I think the most common way people find like a portal into their body is breath. That is certainly something that's been accepted and talked about. And it's really amazing how different cultures really revere breath. And I had lived in Hawaii years ago. And for people who aren't from Hawaii, from the mainland or other places that visit, there's the name haole. And it means without breath. So it's sort of like the ultimate kind of thing you can say about these other people coming in that you don't like, is to say that they are without breath. And so breath is certainly one of the most powerful ways, because it sets into this ripple effect of just our digestion and our lymphatic system and blood flow, and to the brain included, and the ways in which it's such an amazing way to regulate our nervous system. But I think that a lot of people find, connecting to the breath kind of boring or unsexy, or, it's like, well, I mean, I need more than that, right? Like, we want something fancier. And so while the breath is a really powerful first step, I think that there's something to be said for literal movement, like for the discharging release that comes from, exercise for sure. Different types of exercise. It kind of depends. Are you abusing exercise? How are you treating yourself in exercise? Not all exercise is created equal. So noticing how you feel before, during, and after, though, some sort of exercise. And I think listening to intuition and sort of discernment in your movement practices helps inform that. I think that things like auditory release, for finding out even just sighing, like, I think we associate sighing or even like, or any of those noises as we're weird or you're out of control, when I think now we're finding that actually auditory release can be really powerful. Shaking can be powerful, different foam rolling. So I guess for me, when I'm working with clients, I like to try to find what is going to make sense for them to become the toolbox of movement and release. But I also want to just throw in that sometimes actually movement and physical discharge is not necessarily the best thing if we're really in an intense place. Sometimes it's also about containment first, using our body to contain, literally either with, hugging, curling up into a fetal position, getting a hug from somebody else, child's pose. So that's another way in which bodyfulness and really, engaging our body as a tool is kind of nuanced. And that sometimes, many times, and I'm more biased, I think, as somebody who really believes so much in the power of movement and release, but sometimes it's really about engaging and letting go. Sometimes it's about learning how to self-soothe with more of using your body to kind of contain and softening your senses and that sort of thing. So I guess that was an answer to your question. Yes, the breath, but also experimenting with sighing, with shaking, and with any sort of exercise routine that you have, and kind of noticing, like, what does it do to you, both emotionally and mentally, before, during, and after, to kind of sync that connection.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. That gives a wide range of different ways to interact. And another thing I was thinking about, I'd be curious of your opinion on this, but I've noticed for me, like, I have certain types of exercise that I have done forever since I was a little kid. But when I try something new, some other form, I feel like, historically thinking about it, I've been much more connected, just because I have to focus on more of what I'm actually doing. Whereas some of the other forms that I'm more familiar with is more mental, because it's like, okay, I'm trying to play soccer, like perfect the technique of this kick, as opposed to when I first started doing yoga, or still when I do yoga, a lot of the poses I'm like, okay, how do I even get my arm to twist like this, or like different things like that. I'd be curious what you think about trying different modalities.
I think absolutely. Just like we need a variety of, food and food groups and colors and to our food, and get a variety of nutrients that way. Same with our movement. And because I've had a lot of people ask me, like, well, how much yoga do you do a week, or how much do you run every day, or this or that? And I don't run every day or do yoga every day. I really am. My movement is very intuitive. My whole life is very intuitive. It's very much from the inside out, which could sometimes make it hard. Like while on this book deadline, for example, like intuitively, I really want more rest, or I want to like start my day with yoga, but I have to start it with some writing. So it's sort of like an intuitive connection with also, you know, practicing your boundaries and willfulness around things you have to do, that your body may not really always want to do exactly right away. So I think, yes, a variety of things that are cardiovascular, that involve strength, that involve intentional movement, kind of slow, sultry, sensual, intentional movement to really foster that deeper listening. And some things that are about like a deeper, more powerful kind of discharge of more intense energy. And it's really about noticing, like, what are there certain ways of moving that trigger you too, or certain levels of intensity. Like if you have a certain level of intense anxiety or depression, certain types of movement aren't going to be accessible or even helpful to you. Like I said, because sometimes it's about containment, or, you know, it is about like kind of more of a stillness or a breathing. So it's so individualized, and that's where like we have to be kind of our own investigator and be curious in what we're trying and in our body.
Yeah, I feel like for me, as far as like relating it to exercise, I kind of have like an opposite experience than Donovan. I think when I'm doing something familiar, or I actually can like space out, or just like I use exercise as a way to kind of get out of my brain. I'm a big heavy thinker all the time. So my exercise is a way, especially if it's more intense, the intensity, it forces you to focus on your breathing, because I'm just like trying to catch my breath because it's so intense. So for me, it's not necessarily whether I'm familiar with it or not. I guess maybe it's more connected to the intensity, and that helps me get out of my head and into my body and breath a little bit more.
Right. And it's obviously, of course, a dynamic between the two. So even when you're in your body, there's the kind of, there's this biofeedback happening all the time. And it's, you know, a matter of when you are getting into your thoughts about your body, what's the quality of those, you know? But yeah, I've found that, for example, when I'm mountain biking or something and I'm going up a hill, and it's really a matter of like, I have to pay attention, you know, the agility and the engagement of my core, otherwise I'm going to like fall off the side of a mountain. I am so in my experience, in my body, my breath, my focus, and sort of what's in front of me. Whereas if it's something where I don't have to pay as much of attention, I think that's when I can, you know, I'm kind of just jogging on like a flat path. I can more easily go into rumination. But I can also sometimes go into a place of like creativity and kind of visualization. It sort of depends on like the day and, you know, whether I'm in a regulated place or not. So I think that's interesting, and just sort of noticing beforehand, like, what are we called to do? What is our body asking us to do for movement and discharge or containment? And then while we're in it, like sort of what does that elicit? And then afterwards, what do we feel within? I mean, what did that maybe help let go of, or what did that bring up? Or how did that just connect us, you know, more closely to an intimate relationship with ourselves? But so many people just don't move. So sometimes I'm like, just get up and stretch for like, you know, stretch breaks throughout the day. Hey.
Absolutely. I'm curious, do you suggest like different types of movements for men versus women, or is it really kind of depends on the individual and where they're at?
Mm-hmm. You know, the only time that I've really, when I was teaching yoga at one point, a class called Broga, I did not make up the name, somebody made that up, but Broga for the bros. But during the years that I was teaching Broga, I definitely did focus a little bit more on the areas of the body where men can tend to hold more tension, like in the larger muscle groups of the legs. But other than that, I haven't distinguished it, because a lot of it is really wanting people to access their emotions. And I think that people who have been assigned female at birth grow up with more of an acceptance for just being connected to your emotions. Well, it's certainly connected to your feelings. So emotions really emanate in the body. And a lot of times, especially now, research is showing that girls are really disconnecting from their body. But overall, people who are assigned female it's okay to be more of a feeling, emotional being, versus those that are assigned male are socialized that it's really not okay to have emotions and feelings, unless maybe you're at a sporting event, you know, and that even the craving for touch is only okay within regarding sex and that kind of intimacy. So a lot of what I just want to help people do is to strip away the limitations around being an emotional human. And there's masculine and feminine energy that we all have, and it's energy that's in our body that kind of wants to move through. And so more about recognizing, like, are you in balance between your masculine and feminine energy, and able to really access it all, notice it and listen to it all, versus denying or avoiding or thinking that some of your emotions are not okay based on your assigned gender.
Yeah.
So it's less about the movement specific to the body and more just about what is the movement and the body connectioning, like helping you, how is it helping you to get more intimate and accepting with the different emotions and feelings that arise?
Got it. Yes. Yeah, the reason why I asked, because I actually had done an intimacy workshop before. It was like a group workshop, and I had gone with my partner, and I just remember we were discussing how, like, everybody has like feminine energy as well as masculine energy, whether they're man or female or otherwise. And the focus was like for the women to kind of push more of their energy into the feminine, the men more into the masculinity. And what the workshop entailed was having the men just stand still. There was like no touching, so it wasn't like technically sexual, but it was like definitely more sensual. But there was like no, it was really about intimacy. And they had the men just be rock solid, like still, and then the women were just kind of like moving around them however they wanted, essentially. And I felt super awkward in the beginning. It was just like, because you're in a group setting and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to like dance in front of my guy. And it was super awkward, but you know, it was kind of nice because I could see my partner looking at me, and even though I felt awkward, I could see like the love from him out of that. And then they had us rotate do it with random strangers we've never met, which was even like more awkward. But you eventually kind of break through that barrier, and then you circle around and eventually get back to your original partner. And something happened for me where I could just like, I think going through doing the movement piece in front of other men, even though I felt awkward, like eventually I kind of broke down certain barriers. And by the time I got back to my partner, I felt like a lot more comfortable, a lot more fluid, less awkward. And it did bring up emotions. I like was like crying. We weren't even like touching. I just like, we were looking into each other's eyes. I was like crying. He was practically tearing up himself. Don't tell him that. But but it was just like, wow, it was like the movement that allowed for that deep connection, even though there was like zero touching whatsoever. It was pretty powerful.
Yeah. I mean, we are creatures who are meant to move and express and to sing and dance, and we've been doing that from the beginning of time, and we've become more and more focused in here in the thinking and more buttoned up. And it's sort of like there's this, you know, some people burst, really, whether it be in the form of rage or a panic attack, or because there isn't more regular continual ways of being in the body in a way that moves the trauma through, or the way that allows the intimacy and the joy and the fun through. But yeah, it's like that movement, it gets things loose. It's like motion is lotion. And I love there's a lot of these little, somewhat dorky rhymes that I love, you know, like motion is lotion, your issues are in your tissues, you gotta let it flow to let it go. I could go on and on. Yeah. What we resist persists, but really what I think you're sharing is the sense of, you know, there's a wall up, and we don't want to be vulnerable, and being in our bodies is vulnerable, and being in, you know, kind of in our truth and being more kind of expressive can be really vulnerable for a lot of people. So it takes, I mean, a lot of my book and my writing right now is about like, what are all these barriers to something that is so natural, so that we don't feel bad or ashamed or like there's something wrong with us, but just to understand, like, you know, some of the work or the like kind of coming back into our essence as a human, that's natural and okay, not weird or bad or mean that you're crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was even surprised that I had those barriers, because I'm a dancer. I have like a lot of dance experience and a lot of partner dance experience, but this was like a different experience and together, and just like recognize those barriers was pretty powerful. And like, wow, I still have walls that I didn't even, and I thought I had like, you know, a healthy relationship with sexuality and my body and all of that. But even still, even though I feel comfortable in my body, I was just like, wow, there's still barriers. And so what do you suggest? Like, I think to some degree, maybe we all have them, but like, what do you suggest, and how do we break free from those barriers and just really be free and at ease with ourselves and our bodies?
Gosh, yeah, I mean, it's a huge question. And I mean, I think at so many different levels, you know, there's the systems. And right now we're in a time where we're really challenging the messed up systems in our country. And so there are the systems that tell us that we're not okay in our bodies, in the color of our skin, in the size of the body, in what the body kind of wants, or how it expresses itself, or how we're adorning ourselves in our bodies. So many issues related to race and sexism and class. And so there's that right there is, of course, a huge. And these systems really operate on us buying into them, that we need to look a certain way and be a certain way in our body. So, I mean, I think our own initial kind of inner revolution that says no, I don't need to, be skinny and take up less space, or, I'm not going to buy into that. I'm not going to buy into the fact that I have to act white and try to, act because I don't have white skin to try to fit into that culture, that world, or the world of whiteness. I mean, I think that that is a really, amazing conversation that is obviously happening right now at the systemic level, that our systems in the US are sick. We're not well, even just along the lines of mental health and access to healthcare. So those are kind of really some major barriers. But again, we can start within, as far as just our own inner rebel that says, I'm not going to buy into social media likes telling me that I'm valid. I'm going to turn off my phone. And so I can listen to my body and breathe. I'm going to actually take all my vacation time, because I'm not going to buy in to the capitalism that says that I have to overwork in order to be worthy. So these things that really can bring us rest and peace, and tune out some of the comparing mind and the not enough mind. And so, really valuing work-life balance, valuing rest, valuing kind of peace and quiet, and turning off the noise, and not getting into the FOMO and the fear of missing out and the facade and sort of the beauty myths. So it's not easy. I could probably keep going, but it might be kind of a depressing rest of the video. But just, kind of everybody getting intimately acquainted with what are the systems that you're buying into? What are the ways you're kind of buying into our cultural messages that say that kind of all bodies aren't amazing, that every single body and every way that the body kind of wants to really keep us in balance is not okay, is bad or inherently wrong.
I was going to say, I think it's a really important thing just for general happiness. And I define happiness more around well-being. That's probably something that lands a little bit better. But so many people externalize kind of what their happiness is contingent on, like you were saying, into these systems, into these other beliefs. And once we internalize those, we basically leave our happiness contingent on some external system. And I think for many, many people, just figuring out that first piece makes a huge difference. Specifically, when you're talking about your body, that's one that I still need to work through. But there are all these just external ideas that we're bombarded with all the time, and we can choose how much to externalize them. And it's maybe a little bit more of a process than a single, okay, I'm not buying into any of that anymore. But we can work to kind of unwind some of that stuff. And I've seen at least huge progress in just general well-being, just unraveling some of those layers.
So you've seen huge progress in when people prioritize their well-being? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is huge progress in terms of well-being when you can see these external factors and choose which ones you want to actually buy into, and choose which things you're actually going to let stay in your mental space. And it applies to your body, and it applies to all kinds of other factors, but just this relationship between these external ideas and whether or not we choose to internalize them, I think makes a huge difference personally, for sure. And I think I've seen that work for a lot of other people as well.
Right. Yeah. That is a really huge first step, is just to be wait a minute, I see what I'm absorbing, and it's intergenerational, and it's been going on it's been going on before I was even born. I mean, now these gender reveal parties. It's even before we're born, we're kind of thrust into, you're a male, you're a female, there's all these systems. So it's, just to really recognize that is the first act of resistance, and reclaiming, your own just sort of raw, primal, beautiful essence, and just kind of owning it and loving it and appreciating it. And because the world doesn't need more people trying to be someone else, right? we need to all kind of come into our selves-ness as much as we can.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I feel a little conflicted within myself, maybe as a woman, because I want to reclaim my, sexuality, my pleasure, my body, all of that. But at the same time, I don't want to be like hypersexualized by men. I feel like that's like the whole feminist thing of, being harassed, just viewed as an object. And it's just like, how do I figure out that balance of like, I want to reclaim my body, but I don't want to just like put it all out there, or, I don't want to wear like skanky clothes because I don't want to give that impression to others or things like that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Right. Like, how do you make owning yourself as a sexual being and your right to pleasure as true to you, given the ways other people will respond? And it's, it's a lot trickier. I've talked with some different friends and clients who are raising children in this day and age, and that with that very idea of like, you don't want to shame, like, oh, don't wear that, it shows, your shoulder too much or something, but you don't want to let them maybe go out in something that would, of course, just by societal standards seem inappropriate. So it's, again, like it's a really nuanced and challenging thing to come into, like, how are we going to reclaim something that others might not understand or judge us or treat us differently because, and I know, just in like kind of thinking of my own personal journey as I have become, more into my now 40s, it's because I know myself and I know my boundaries and I'm not afraid to say no. I think that really helps. And, but I think that no matter how covered up women are, I mean, women are going to be objectified and sexualized. I think it starts with kind of what lights you up as far as how you express and adorn yourself. Like, what do you feel good in? Like, what just taps into like you feeling kind of good or fun or creative, and kind of starting it there. I say that to kind of men, women, non-binary. How we are, in our body and show and express our body be an expression of just kind of our own delight and creativity, our mood, how we're feeling. That'd be the ideal. That we, if we want to wear something that happens to be lower cut and might show a bit of cleavage, great. So be it. That shouldn't mean that it's an invitation to come and sexualize me. I mean, that would be the ideal. But my hope is that it wouldn't stop people from being able to, kind of show and express what they want. And I think too, that not so much being sexualized, but to be able to flirt. I'm actually a big fan of the concept of flirting. And I researched it and found that every species, there's flirting in different ways. And it's really a way to kind of connect. It's a rapport, it's a vibe. And it's another word I think that we've like sexualized and if you flirt, it'll lead to this, and then you ask for it. And so I see clothing kind of, and kind of how you are in your posture, your stance, your body expressions can be a form of flirting to engage and connect in a fun, like playful way that shouldn't always have to be associated with it being about being sexualized.
Yeah, that's really a great way to think about it.
So you could, Dr. Fong, tomorrow wake up and just open up your closet and be like, what am I in the mood for today? What does my body kind of crave wearing? And, maybe because we're still social distancing, it's the implications are pretty minor because you're just walking around maybe your own house or maybe the grocery store, and then have it feel pleasurable to you. Like start from like, this feels good in my skin or comfy or frilly or whatever it may be. I feel stronger in this,
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a lot of yoga pants lately to the store everywhere. Yeah. Or actually, since it's been getting hotter lately, I have been wearing more dresses lately, but yes.
I know that I basically challenged myself a few years ago because here I was suggesting that other people engage in dynamic types of movement. And I found that I was sort of limiting, I wasn't doing enough dance. And I love kind of spontaneously dancing in the car or the shower, but I realized that, I want to keep challenging my brain. I love how dance really it engages kind of this bilateral part of our brain, and really that mind-body connection I think is amazing. So I decided I wanted more dance in my life. And so I did different, whether it be hip hop dance or Zumba, but then I decided I was going to just sort of take the risk, and I took burlesque. And I actually ended up taking introduction to burlesque twice, not just once, but twice, but it was in part because I had to miss a lot of the first session. So I'm really at that level 1. I do really well at level 1 of burlesque, and that's about it. But I felt like it was a good way for me to really walk the walk, not just talk the talk, about kind of owning being body positive and sex positive in my body. And then it culminates with this performance. You basically, and I didn't tell anybody, it was like, I think the night before the performance, I only told my sister. And she's like, all right, me and my husband will come. So my brother and I was like, no, you can't. No, my brother-in-law cannot come. So it's certainly a very vulnerable personal thing, like how we express our bodies, and, you're not nude in burlesque, but there is sort of this insinuation of it, and really kind of owning that you feel hot and sexy and can move and kind of bend freely. And so anyway, I guess I just want to say that even for somebody who really, this has become such a big area of my professional path, I'm still a woman in the Western world, a white woman in the Western world who has all sorts of, kind of hangups around what is or isn't okay with being in the pleasures of my body. So it's a life, it's a life practice. And for men too, in their own ways of how they can or can't be in their body, as far as expectations around strength and dominance and being a breadwinner and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I definitely had, I think it was 2 years ago now, maybe. But I broke my collarbone. And before that, I had been pretty much fit and healthy all the time. And it was very, very much a struggle for me to tap into and be okay with getting help with a lot of simple things. Like I can put my socks on because I was so busted up, but I was so unaccustomed to being in my body in that way and being so helpless in that way that it was such a struggle. And it was good. I don't know how much progress I made. Like, I don't know if I made it all the way to the end, but it was good to have that experience now, to see like this idea or this image that I've been clinging to for so long of like, I need to be strong and fit. Otherwise, like, that's part of my value. Otherwise, I don't know what. It was good to get an experience outside of that to see like, you can still exist and it's still fine and you can still be valuable, but you have to be able to accept some of these other things that don't fit that image. And that image, going back to talking about external stuff, like that doesn't mean anything. It's just some idea that I've got from somewhere and then internalized and kept. So I think what you're saying, like around just kind of some of these ideas is really important to like, oh, I guess mine wasn't an experiment, but
Yeah.
It is nice to have experiments to see like where your boundaries are and what you're comfortable with and what these ideas are actually doing for you.
Yeah, and how you are overly attached to certain things. Like I recognize very consciously that I have too much attachment in being able-bodied, physically athletic, also a lot around kind of youthfulness and that, that's causing me suffering to have put too much attachment on those things versus my essence or my soul or my relationships or meaning and purpose. But it's that external piece is, people judge us and make a lot of impressions on that. And we've gotten validated for it, over the years. And so as much as I'm always talking about movement, I've worked with clients who are in chronic pain or injury, and they don't have their body as a tool in the same way. It's been good to remind me of, yes, our body can be a tool, but sometimes we do not want to be in our body. It hurts. It's in pain. It feels uncomfortable. It feels foreign. And so it's not an easy process, depending on the past trauma, to kind of befriend our experience in our body. It's not at all. It takes, and the more chronic the traumas or the more complex, obviously that can take longer. You have to move really slow. And there's so many amazing methods, and somatic experiencing and trauma sensitive yoga are the ones that I know the best, that I think are really powerful for that. So your collarbone, that trauma has, who knows to what extent it's still living in your body and your body memory right now.
It seems like I can do most stuff again, but I'm also, like I said, not super tapped into my body. I'm working on it.
Yeah, you better after this talk.
Yes. Well, Rachel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our show. And, I just really want to acknowledge you for the work you're doing. It's so needed in the world, especially in America right now, where we're all very repressed. And you admitted to having some levels of inner barriers that you're working through as well. I think we're all kind of at different degrees, but we're all have whatever internal barriers to be able to access our bodies completely. And yeah, I just really acknowledge you again for everything that you're doing. Is there anything you would like to plug right now?
I guess it's funny because I'm sitting here writing in my book, writing about how the kind of perils of being in front of a computer too much or being on social media too much. But nonetheless, I'm in front of a computer a lot. And suppose people keep telling me I'm supposed to be doing more on my social media for my brand. But that I do have, on Instagram is pleasure_expert. And I think you already mentioned my TEDx talk. But yeah, I think just, I'm just kind of excited to keep spreading pleasure to the people. And thank you for saying that this experience was pleasurable for you. Let's use the word pleasurable as much as possible in all different senses of the word so we can free it from the shackles of only being associated with sexual pleasure, which is also wonderful. And there's all sorts of other life pleasures. But thank you, though. The pleasure's also been mine.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.